либо-либо.
Last August, my family and I visited Amboseli, a national park on the border of Kenya and Tanzania. It is home to a uniquely undisturbed population of African elephants. Over the past few decades, the elephants living there haven't been hunted, but they have been intensely studied. Local scientists and guides recognize each of the 63 resident elephant families by sight. At one point during our tour, the guide suggested I get a closer look at one of the families. Normally this isn't allowed, since getting too close can be very dangerous. I was apprehensive, but our guide looked like he knew what he was doing, so I figured this was an opportunity I mustn't miss. He parked our jeep in the path of an approaching group of around 20 elephants. I got out of the car and laid down on the ground with my camera. The group was advancing steadily and silently. Leading them was a fairly large adult elephant. Only once he'd gotten right up to me did he stop moving, and the rest of the group also stopped, but remained at a distance. I pressed myself into the dry, bare soil and looked up at him. The elephant was calmly studying me. His ears were folded, indicating that he was relaxed. I snapped a few shots of him from below. A 4-ton elephant appears even larger than it already is from down there. The elephant eased toward me and extended his trunk, which extended telescopically, and sniffed me, almost touching me. He pulled back a little, and then he reached out again and examined me once more. And what happened next felt like an earthquake. He'd clearly come to some unflattering conclusion about me. So he abruptly pulled back, tilted his head toward me, and spread his ears, snorting and shaking his head. Listen to the moment this happened. My blood ran cold, but I tried to stay as still as possible. We stayed like that for 10 seconds. It felt like 10 minutes. Finally, the elephant continued on his way, past the jeep. The rest of the group followed him. One of the teen elephants, weighing no more than a ton, also shook his head angrily at me, doing his best to copy the first elephant. One by one, they passed me by, and then came the final elephant. She was an old female with very long but thin tusks. Our guide told us to pay attention to her. She was special. She was noticeably smaller than the first elephant. She too turned her head in my direction and spread her ears in disapproval, but she did not slow her pace. I took no more photos. My hands were shaking and I was breathing hard. But things seemed to have worked out. I was still alive. Suddenly, another elephant, a giant male that was lagging far behind the group, came toward me. My guide was usually quite relaxed, but this time he seemed panicked. He demanded that I return to the jeep immediately.
It's dangerous. If I see he's doing something.
So I jumped back in the car, and soon we were racing at full speed across the crusted earth. How was the guide able to tell immediately that that particular elephant was so dangerous? And why was the very last female the most important, according to our guide? That, and the ways the elephant societies work, is what we'll be discussing in today's episode. This is The Naked Mole Rat by Libo Studio, and I'm Ilya Kolmanovsky. Hello. By this point in my trip, I had already asked several guides about how elephant communities are organized. One thing I knew for sure, that old female with the long, thin tusks was the leader of the group we'd seen. Adolescent males live with their family until they're about 15 years old, at which point they're expelled from the group. Adult males usually come to the family to mate and don't stick around for long afterward. Somehow my guide immediately knew that one of the males I encountered was dangerous, while the other was not. Back at my tent, I went over the photos and videos I'd taken of that encounter. I connected to the Wi-Fi and looked up scientific articles on elephant behavior. And then I learned that the camp of the world's leading expert on elephant behavior, Dr. Cynthia Moss, was just 7 kilometers away from where we were. I immediately reached out to her with my magic email, the one I used to invite people onto the podcast, which, as you know, has worked many times before. All evening and the following morning, I refreshed my inbox. I was flying home at noon that same day. No response. I returned to Moscow, where I used to live back then. A week later, I realized that elephants had become an obsession. I kept reading books and articles about them, researching for videos about them online, and following various elephant projects from all over Africa on Instagram. It took 2 months of negotiation with Cynthia Moss's team, which includes many young women who are fiercely protective of her peace of mind. I finally received a yes. I could speak to her at a specified date and time 3 weeks later. I could have an hour with her. Zoom wasn't an option, since the internet connection at the camp was too weak. So to do the interview, I'd need to fly to Qatar, change to a flight to Nairobi, then switch to a small plane to reach the Tanzanian border before driving to her camp. Never in my 15-year career as a science journalist had I traveled 3 days for a single hour-long interview. I double-checked that I had enough batteries for my sound recorder, and I set off. After I touched down on the tiny runway at the national park, I actually had 48 hours before the interview. For some reason, I was intensely anxious about this meeting. In fact, I could barely sit still. So I spent the next couple of days elephant watching, and I'll tell you about it later. And finally it was time. I got into the jeep and drove to the camp of the legendary Cynthia Moss. I arrived at the camp where Cynthia Moss had been working for the last 50 years. It was made up of big tents and adorned with elephant skulls. Good afternoon, Dr. Moss.
Hi.
Nice to meet you. I'm Ilya.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes. Hi.
Very cautiously.
Hi.
I'm so happy to be here.
Hello, my name is Cynthia Moss, and I'm the director of the Amboselli Elephant Research Project, which is run by the Amboselli Trust for Elephants. And it's the longest running elephant project in the world, and we will be reaching our 50th anniversary next September. I came to Africa first in 1967, and I was just a traveler. I offered to 3 weeks to work on a project in Tanzania on elephants by a very well-known Ian Douglas Hamilton.
By the 1960s, most of what scientists knew about elephant life had come from hunters. There were very few Western scientists actually working in Africa, but then a new cohort of researchers was emerging. They lived side by side with their subjects and observed them for years. Cynthia Moss was a young Newsweek journalist when she came to Africa from New York to volunteer with the scientists in 1967. She arrived just in time to witness this paradigm shift. And what started as a vacation became much more when, once in Africa, Moss learned something that changed her life. It turned out that the leaders of the elephant herds weren't the males.
Well, the view was from the writing about animals, about wildlife, was mostly done by hunters, sport hunters particularly. And they often got things wrong, They thought they knew a lot about it, but they knew how to shoot them, but not very much about their behavior. And so they thought that every herd of elephants, as they called them, had a dominant bull who was the leader. But that was just in their own minds, like beauty is in the minds of the beholder. Alpha male is in the mind of a male.
I suppose my elephant, remember, the one that sniffed me while I was lying on the ground back in August? That elephant would have prompted the hunter to draw the same conclusion because he's in front, so he must be the leader. But by the mid-60s, it had become evident that this wasn't the case. Elephants are led by older female matriarchs like Sadie, the one walking in the rear of the group we saw. Moss recalls her first encounter with a matriarch.
Yes, I remember when I first got to Manyara back in 67, Ian took me and my friend out. We were traveling together, another woman from Newsweek. And he terrified us because this big matriarch named Boadicea came charging the car. She did this every time. But she always would stop short, in a cloud of dust and then just wave her ears. I was terrified. I'm surprised I actually came back to do anything because he constantly scared me like that. But that was my first matriarch, yeah.
It's remarkable how the change in our perception of elephant communities mirrored the changes in human society. It was easier for Cynthia, as a lifelong feminist, to accept the elephant's matriarchy than it had been for previous observers.
I was a feminist, so I still am, I guess. It's always it's a nice system. It works, it works. Families are, the wise matriarch, and she's basically the repository of all knowledge for the family. She knows where to go in the wet season and the dry. She knows where to find water in the dry season. She knows where the last food is and things like that. She's, she passes that down to her daughters and sisters.
And Moss learned something else during that first trip. It turned out that elephant faces are memorable to humans, even in large numbers, because each elephant has uniquely shaped ears and tusks. This was a time when a new generation of passionate naturalists had just arrived in Africa, ready to establish contact with the local wildlife. They were conducting now legendary longitudinal studies of lions, chimpanzees, and gorillas. Cynthia Moss had found her calling. She quit her job, left New York, and moved to Nairobi. At first, she worked odd jobs, looking for a way to realize her dream, to live in Amboseli with the elephants. Amboseli is a special place. Normally, elephants don't cohabitate well with people. Humans hunt elephants, and elephants eat human crops. But these lands have always belonged to the Maasai, a nomadic herding people who have no issue living alongside the elephants. Maasai neither cultivate the land nor hunt for meat. They also resolutely defend their territories from all intrusions. At the time of Cynthia Moss's arrival, the Maasai hadn't been allowing white people, like ivory hunters, onto their land for several centuries. But they did let in scientists. Cynthia Moss realized that she was in the presence of a uniquely undisturbed population of elephants. She settled among them in the very location where she and I are now sitting and chatting, and started following elephants around by car with a camera like a paparazzi. At the time, the reserve was home to about 500 elephants. Over the years, Moss created a complete photographic catalog of elephant ears. She identified each of the families and their matriarchs and gave names to all the females and some of the males. As Moss explains in her book, which is called Elephant Memories, it's generally not a common practice for scientists to name their subjects because giving human names to animal subjects might make scientists more likely to attribute human qualities to them, but elephants are an exception. When you have hundreds of long-term subjects, giving them names is the only way not to get them confused. And then Moss writes that if an elephant she was observing was called Linda or Ella, they would inevitably become the most important Linda or Ella in her life. In fact, when Cynthia met a person and heard their name, it was the ears and personality of the similarly named elephant that came to her mind rather than the other way around. To have enough names for all the elephants, Cynthia Moss is always looking for new ones. She searches in directories, saint lists, lists of literary characters, and so on. When she meets someone with a rare name, She asks them to spell it out so she can add it to her collection. When I was leaving, I promised to send her a list of Russian names she could use. Soon, Cynthia Moss knew all the local elephants by sight. It became clear that the elephant matriarchs lived in groups with several related females and their offspring. The matriarch knows her territory. She knows the best spots for mud and dust baths, very necessary for elephant skin care and sun protection. She can find good swamps to cool off in during the midday heat and where to find water during the dry season. After reaching adulthood, females stay with their family, beginning to reproduce at around 12 to 15 years old. The males, meanwhile, go off to live in their own territories. Adult bulls live alone or with friends. Cynthia Moss was only interested in the core groups of females, these family units. But exactly how females and males got together for reproduction remained unclear. This bears repeating. Even as late as the mid-70s, we still had little idea about how the largest land animal mated. And then Moss observed that adult males sometimes had a strange, possibly venereal illness.
These males would come in and they'd be streaming from the organ, the temporal gland on the side of their face. And they'd be constantly dribbling urine, and the whole sheath and penis would turn sort of a greenish-white color. And they were strong smell. And I was sure they had a disease. And I remember saying to somebody, they're going to give this to all the females, And
How did you call it?
Yes.
How did you call it?
Green penis disease, yes.
Okay, green penis disease.
Yes, so at around that time when I started to see it, I brought a young person who was the daughter of my boss at the time at the African Wildlife Foundation. And he said, do you have a place for her? And I said, yeah, she could come out. And, she was still at university. Joyce Poole, who's also now very well known. And I said, look, Joyce, the males and the females live in such different lives that I can't do both of them. There's no way that a single person can study both the females and their families and everything and the males, because they live in different places, they do different things. So I said, why don't you look at the males? So she did.
Joyce Poole began tracking these green-penised males across the savanna. She discovered that what was happening to them wasn't a disease at all. Their symptoms were signs of a special reproductive state called must, M-U-S-T-H. Male elephants turn into these sort of deranged versions of themselves, focused solely on mating. They stop obeying the females, but simultaneously become unbearably attractive to them. A male in must oozes testosterone. His testosterone levels are 20 times higher than normal.
How did you find out?
She was collecting urine, which was very brave.
How do you do that? How do you collect urine?
Well, she would, after the male peed, she and Nora, her assistant, would run up, to get out of the car and get it in little bottles, off the ground.
Sounds like a suicide mission, but luckily, puddles last longer than normal on ground this hard. They could collect and send urine samples to the US for testing.
And that showed that the hormones were very, very high. So everything changes. It's like Jekyll and Hyde, that story, where, the bull, when he's not in must, he's very relaxed. He's out with his other bull friends, and then he goes through this transformation where he leaves the bull area and moves into the areas where the bulls tend to spend time. There's several bull areas around. And he'll leave that, and he'll leave his buddies and come and try to find a female. Two things he does. He tries to find females that are receptive in estrus, or he tries to find a bull that he isn't sure where they are in the hierarchy, so he might want to have a fight with that bull. So when they come into must, they change their whole posture. They lift their heads, they tuck their chin in, they swagger, and they have these special ear waves, usually both ears, not like that, but like this, and this deep, infrasound rumble, very, very deep. I mean, we can hear part of it, but I'm sure, and that carries a long way. So Joyce called that honest advertising, because he was advertising that he was surging with these testosterone, with these, and he was dangerous. So the message to the other males was, I'm dangerous. If you get in my way or you try to, confront me, I will kill you. Watching two musk males fight is terrifying, totally terrifying, because I think any minute one of them's going to die. Anyway, so to the males, he's telling them that, and they'll get out of his way, and they'll even go out of must, the other one, like a younger male who's just maybe starting to come into must, if he sees and he smells the other, the trail, even the scent trail, he'll immediately dry up and stuff. Oh, no, I wasn't in must at all,
It became clear that elephants have a two-stage reproductive system. First, at 12 to 15 years old, a male elephant reaches sexual maturity and starts living alone or with other males. Must, however, can occur only when the elephant gets to around 35 to 40 years old, a very mature age. Then, it happens every year for 3 or 4 months at a time. During this time, he lives in a state of constant stress, eats little, and searches for females. No one, neither matriarchs nor other males, can challenge these males. Female elephants, when they're ovulating, try to bond with these males. Why? Well, because must is an honest advertisement. If an elephant can afford to expend his energy in this way, he must be strong and with good genes. And the fact that he's old enough to enter must at all also speaks positively of him. It's a sign of his longevity. Still, about 13% of conceptions occur outside of must. In those cases, it's just a question of being in the right place at the right time. The group of elephants we met at the beginning of this episode included a male in must. He was the one who came toward me after the group had passed, which explains why we had to get away from him as quickly as possible. But the group also included a younger adult male, the one I interacted with. There was no real conflict between these two males. A younger male like that is no rival to a male in must, so he wouldn't inspire aggression. Decade after decade, Cynthia Moss's research continued. Elephants were born and grew up, families expanded and broke into new ones, and matriarchs changed. Still more surprising discoveries were made, and the picture of elephant society that had replaced the ideas of white male hunters started to grow increasingly complex. For example, Cynthia Moss witnessed some elephants throwing branches and dirt onto the bodies of their deceased. She also observed how they took care of each other during illness. And then, real complexity emerged from her observations. It appeared that the matriarch-led family was only the base unit of elephant society. Multiple related families were linked in groups, and whenever they met, they performed special greeting rituals. Then related groups united into clans. Sometimes during rainy seasons, entire clans gathered, sometimes counting up to 100 elephants. And then clans unite into subpopulations. There are currently 2 subpopulations in Amboseli. They include about 1,000 females living with their offspring. Separately, about 500 males roam their own territories. Cynthia Moss developed this picture of elephant society over 30 years of observation. She then claimed that this picture, this structure, was not only in her head, but also in the minds of the elephants themselves. To prove this, she studied their communications. Elephants' complex society relies on a system of signals that we are only just starting to decipher.
We did some very interesting experiments called playback experiments, where we played sounds to the elephants by a very good scientist named Karen McComb, who's at Sussex University, and she did the playbacks. And I was very happy with the result, because, sometimes you think, oh, well, I've superimposed the structure of the clans on them, but maybe it doesn't really exist in their minds. There's one of the vocalization, very common vocalization, is here am I. where are you, asking, where are you? We call it the contact call. And then there's usually an answer. And she would play, she would say, take Echo, the, famous matriarch, her contact call.
Echo is a legendary matriarch, possibly the most studied elephant in history. She lived to the age of 64, and Moss has spent countless hours with her. There have been 4 documentary films made about her. This is her contact call. Listen again. This is the recording that Macomb played.
And she would play it to her family or part of her family when she wasn't there. It was never confuse them, She would play it when Echo wasn't there to her family. And inevitably, if she called, they all, called back and moved toward the speaker that was hidden, They would move toward it. And then if she played it to Echo's Bond group members, they would call back. They would rumble back, but they wouldn't move to the speaker. If they played it to the clan, they just ignored it because they said, oh, yeah, that's just Echo, Yeah, she's here all the time. But if they played it, especially if they played it to the subgroup where Echo doesn't belong, where she isn't, they would bunch together and get nervous. So that just showed it did exist in their own minds as well. So I was very pleased that came out that way.
Cynthia Moss's students' research showed that an adult female elephant knows the contact calls of at least 100 other elephants. In fact, the newest data suggests that females in groups actually call each other by name. There are certain sounds that appear to be used by everyone in the group only in the direction of particular members of that group. How do they manage to remember all these names and relationships? Relationships between older and younger calves in the group are some of the most intricate aspects of elephant childhood. Cynthia Moss says that an elephant mother would actually not be able to raise a calf alone without the help of adolescent elephant babysitters. The young female elephants gain something from this arrangement too. By caring for the little ones, they not only assist the mother, but also learn more about adult life. I showed Moss a short video I'd shot the day before in a swamp half a mile from my tent. It was just a few minutes long, but captured a dozen scenes from the life of a 5-year-old calf.
Yeah, that's a female named Anan.
Anan.
Yeah,
Is she a matriarch?
No,
No?
no, she's young. She's young.
So she was there with this one?
Yeah, that's Artemis.
So while Cynthia Moss lists the names of her old acquaintances, let me describe to you what happens in the video. There's a small group of females intensely focused on mud baths. Some are bathing in the liquid mud, others have already climbed out and are polishing their tusks with their trunks, or rubbing one leg against another, or digging up dry earth in order to dust themselves in it and protect their skin from the sun. Tiny female, no more than 6 months old, sits in a mud pit. Next to her is a 5-year-old. The 5-year-old lies down beside the pit and extends her trunk towards the baby. Cynthia Moss believes they are sisters. The older one, the 5-year-old, keeps extending her trunk, and Moss explains that this is maternal behavior. She is mimicking her mother. I thought the baby was stuck in the pit and couldn't get out, but Moss, laughing, tells me it's all a game. The calves sometimes like to pretend they cannot get out. The older sister continues nudging the younger one with her trunk. This is real babysitting, it's her job now. Meanwhile, the mother calmly carries on with her skincare routine. She can afford to do so as her baby is being looked after. And then something dramatic happens. A giant bull in must is approaching from afar. Thick dark liquid is dripping from his temple and streams of urine flow down his legs. He has a strange gait. The knee of his rear right leg is swollen and doesn't bend. With each step, he swings his straight leg in a large arc out and forward like an old pirate walking on a wooden peg. This was probably an injury from a fight. Approaching the group, the bull emits a low rumble, to which the mother responds with a deafening trumpet. I was so excited at the time that I forgot to switch on the audio recording, but I found a similar exchange in a scientific collection of elephant communications.
Maybe she was just getting out of his way. Musk bulls, you have to respect them.
And then came the most astonishing part. The mother led the baby calf away, and the bull was surrounded by 3 females, all in states of great agitation. A silent dialogue ensued between them, filled with dozens of poses and gestures. Cynthia Moss was able to translate only a few of them for me. The bull hung his trunk over his right tusk, and this indicated a relaxed, peaceful mood. The females turned their backs to him. One, a 5-year-old, shifted from foot to foot, frequently extending her trunk toward the bull. She then turned her rear towards him and began to back into the space between his tusks. The bull placed his trunk on her back. And then, as if on cue, she emptied her bladder. These steps were then repeated by all the females in turn. As is customary when a bull in must arrives, he is checking which of them is ready to mate.
Then that's what he wants, but she's much too young.
Yes.
But she's probably seen her older sister or her mother do that.
You sound disapprovingly.
No, it's what happens.
Elephants have the longest childhood of any mammal other than humans. An elephant calf is born completely helpless. They need to learn so many things. An elephant's brain is 2.5 times larger than a human's, and it stores information about finding food, raising offspring, escaping the heat, and communicating with other elephants. And then, just when I thought I knew almost all there was to know about elephant life, I showed Cynthia Moss the photos of that very first elephant I'd met. The bull from the beginning of the episode who sniffed me while I lay curled up on the arid earth. Who is he? And what was his status in that large family? He is no longer a teenager, but clearly not yet a mature bull. He definitely wasn't in must. What was he doing there?
Sometimes they just move with family. Some bulls like to be with family, even if they're not in must.
How old is he, do you think?
He looks like he's about 25, maybe.
Maybe related or something like that.
I doubt it. Probably not.
Cynthia Moss says she doesn't know for sure. Maybe he was a relative, maybe not. Most likely not. Elephants have dozens of social roles, and not all of them have been studied. A solitary elephant, an elephant with a companion, an elephant that hangs out with females for a few days during a long migration without obvious sexual intentions. Why was he there? Did he just want to use the matriarch's knowledge to safely cross a part of the park? Was he waiting for the must bull to leave to try to mate? Was he just there to socialize? I printed a 5-foot-tall photo of him and gave it to my in-laws. When I visit them, I look up at him towering over me, wondering who might be able to provide a more precise answer to my questions. You're hearing pianist Martha Argerich in her 1960 debut recording of Prokofiev's Toccata in D minor. She once said that only ivory gives the fingers a truly authentic sensation, a feeling of getting feedback from the keys. Piano keys have long been made from plastic, but sadly, the killing of elephants hasn't decreased. And hunters these days no longer aid researchers like they used to. Now people come in jeeps with Kalashnikovs, they're not studying anyone. The last 50 years have brought a wealth of new information about elephant life, and all the while the extermination of elephants has reached a whole new level. 100 years ago, there were about 3 million African elephants. Today, there are only about 350,000 left. The ivory trade was finally banned worldwide in 1989, but ivory's black market prices are still rising. In China and elsewhere in Asia, it's a luxury commodity used to make decorative items. In the time it took you to listen to this episode, 2 adult elephants were killed in Africa. Their tusks were probably torn from their heads and their bodies left lying in the savannah. A recent aerial survey of the elephant population showed that in Angola, for example, you can spot 1 dead elephant for every 4 living ones. One researcher writes, "To me, the elephant is a huge gray mirror reflecting the fate of all life on Earth. If we aren't able to protect the largest land animal, and our grandchildren won't get to see it, what hope is there for the smaller creatures and their countless secrets, which may vanish forever, remaining unsolved by science?" This was The Naked Mallrat, a podcast from Libo Studio. It is produced by Andrey Borzenko, Ilya Marritz, Danil Astapov, Anastasia Medvedeva, and Lika Kremer. Our sound editors are Ildar Fattakhov and Alexei Vorobyov, and I'm Ilya Kolmanovsky. See you in 2 weeks.